Welcome to episode 80 of the Henry George Daily Devotional. 80 days. Crazy. We're still in our favorite book, which is, yes, The Justice of the Remedy. That's book 7. We are in chapter 5 now, which is like the history of America, private property. Yes, in Virginia and the South. What was the exact term he used? Of property inland in the United States. Of property inland in the United. The states that are united. That's where I live. This is episode 80, book 7, chapter 5. All right. At the cost of a bloody war, 700,000 people dead on both sides together. We abolished chattel slavery, and yet we permit slavery in a more widespread and dangerous form to take root. Well, it wasn't taking root. It existed. The northern factory workers, I don't know when exactly factories became a big deal, but it wasn't like the lower class in the North were living in a Georgist unland or no land monopoly world. So if both sides had wage slavery and one additionally had chattel slavery, seems pretty good to get rid of the chattel slavery. All right, let's go. George writes, "The continent has seemed so wide, the area over which population might yet pour so vast, that familiarized by habit with the idea of private property in land, we have not realized its essential injustice." Yes, there's so much land, surely there's enough for everybody, the Americans thought. For not merely has this background of unsettled land prevented the full effect of private appropriation from being felt, even in the older sections, but to permit a man to take more land than he could use, that he might compel those who afterwards needed it to pay him for the privilege of using it, has not seemed so unjust when others in their turn might do the same thing by going further on. This was a conceptual hang-up I had with Georgism for a while, that, suppose there were an infinite plain of fertile land, uh, then it doesn't seem so bad. Everyone can keep expanding. But I have disabused myself of that notion because, in a simple way, if you think of it like, suppose one or two plots of land can produce enough food for everybody, then if you go further out to this equally good land, you could produce more food, but then your transportation costs are going to be higher to get that food back to where everyone was already living. So what you'll have to sell lower, so whatever, you're not going to make as much money, and so on and so forth as you get farther and farther out. But clearly also there's a saturation point where using that land for its sort of independent natural value becomes less and less good, and the actual value is then the proximity and network effects of being near other men, humans, so that you might divide labor, develop new forms of labor, or provide services to them. And so it becomes kind of a moot question. I don't know. It just becomes It just sort of says that it doesn't matter if you can go infinitely, there's infinitely good agricultural land. There's not infinitely good business land because there's not an infinite amount of folded space or something near where the rest of society is. Um, which, yeah, I think this all like Lars Doucette in like one of the first interviews I heard from him, he made some sort of offhand comment about like on an infinite plane you wouldn't need Georgism or something like that, and that threw me off for a while because I think if I'm remembering correctly, I don't agree with that claim from Lars Doucette, but I really really respect Lars Doucette and think he uh, really understands Georgism well, and I don't think he would um, espouse that belief. I don't know, he may have just misspoken in that moment. Or maybe he's come to a different view now. I don't know. But that threw me off for a while. And so I understand that early American settlers, they could not conceive when there was like, 110,000, I don't know how many Americans at in 1776. 2.5 million. That's actually a lot more than I thought. So it seems like they could have actually imagined there being, you know, 250 million, 100 times their number. Um, Seems like they could have imagined, but it would have taken some serious foresight to imagine the place getting all full up. But anyway, it, George says it did not seem so unjust when others in their turn might do the same thing by going further on, the same thing being claiming a bunch of land and then renting it out. And more than this, the very fortunes that have resulted from the appropriation of land, and that have thus really been drawn from taxes levied upon the wages of labor, have seemed and have been heralded as prizes held out to the laborer. In all the newer states, and even to a considerable extent in the older ones, our landed aristocracy is yet in its first generation. Yeah, interesting. Uh, our landed aristocracy is yet in its first generation. I don't know exactly what he would mean by that, because 1879 is 100 years after the Declaration of Independence, and that is 100-ish years after the first colonists got here. Um, but you could imagine that really early colonists lived in pretty cooperative modes. Those who have profited by the increase in the value of land have been largely men who began life without a cent. Their great fortunes, many of them running up high into the millions, seems to them and to many others as the best proofs of the justice of existing social conditions in rewarding prudence, foresight, industry, and thrift. Whereas the truth is that these fortunes are but the gains of monopoly, and are necessarily made at the expense of labor. But the fact that those thus enriched started as laborers hides this, and the same feeling which leads every ticket bolder in a lottery to delight in imagination in the magnitude of the prizes has prevented even the poor from quarreling with the system which thus made many poor men rich. Yeah, every American is a millionaire down his luck or something. The proletariat temporarily embarrassed. I gotta remember this line. Steinbeck said, "Socialism never has temporarily embarrassed millionaires. That's why socialism never took root." Steinbeck, how did you not know about um, Georgism? Uh, I had a comment. Poor man rich. I mean, that quote is very interesting. Um, oh yeah, maybe I've already talked about this in another Henry George Day devotional episode, but I was recently reading about how a bunch of samurai, after the samurai class was had a lot of their wealth seized and they were persecuted, in a few generations the samurai families again sort of reached the upper echelon of society. And this was also the case according to random Twitter thread about like the elites in China after the Cultural Revolution who were also, imprisoned and had their wealth seized and persecuted. A few generations later, their offspring also seem to reascend to being elite. So whether or not you think eliteness is genetic or not, or even if you don't care about that, even if like we have a meritocratic society where the best get the best, and you think that that is how things should be, um, yeah, I think I talked about it, yeah, like the alpha male doesn't in like a wolf pack. Well, wolf packs are small, but like we shouldn't have a society where even if like the person who works the hardest wins, which is sort of what seems just, winning shouldn't be defined as they get everything and everyone else gets nothing. It shouldn't even be defined as the winner gets 80% and the losers get 20%. It should be each action of labor receives its just reward, which, maybe you think that's a little vague, but yeah. In short, and not to diminish at all, traditionally we look at all these billionaires. I do think they are uh, what's the word? Value creating in thousands of ways. I think their hard work, sure, their willingness to take on risk, um, but they're just their judgment and what risk to take on and what to do, and their ability to hire people, the right people, and organize them. I think I think those are, some people are magnificent at that kind of leadership, and they should probably, that work should be very highly compensated because it enables so much production. Um, I do not think, though, that it would be enough to compensate them to the billionaire level. Um, but anyway. In short, the American people have failed to see the essential injustice of private property in land because, as yet, they have not felt its full effects. This public domain, the vast extent of land yet to be reduced to private possession, the enormous common to which the faces of the energetic were always turned, has been the great fact that since the days when the first settlements began to fringe the Atlantic coast, has formed our national character and colored our national thought. Yes. I guess I should say that in that infinite plane example, it is that Georgism is still necessary. Uh, However, having infinite amount of agricultural land, if your society is still somewhat small and undeveloped, it'll be quite some time before the benefit of just claiming new land that you work is no longer the most productive thing to do. And in a lot of early American history, the most productive thing to do was still to go claim more land rather than work for a survival wage in the cities that already existed. The margin of cultivation, that is, had not yet been pushed out that far, I guess. It is not that we have eschewed a titled aristocracy and abolished primogeniture, that we elect all our officers from school director up to president, that our laws run in the name of the people instead of in the name of a prince, that the state knows no religion and our judges wear no wigs. It is not because of these things that we have been exempted from the ills that Fourth of July orators used to point to as characteristic of the effete despotisms of the old world. The general intelligence, the general comfort, the active invention, the power of adaptation and assimilation, the free, independent spirit, the energy and hopefulness that have marked our people are not causes, but results. They have sprung from unfenced land. Yeah, this is crazy to think about. You know, you're raised as like rah land of the free. And George is saying our massive gains in personal freedom, our massive gains in worldly comforts are not due. Well, I guess I mixed that up a little bit. Our massive personal freedoms of religion, freedoms of, you know, not being classist, those are not the cause of our great gain in worldly comforts, but it is that we have had all of this land. This public domain has been the transmuting force which has turned, transmuting meaning turning it to gold, which has turned the thriftless, unambitious European peasant into the self-reliant Western farmer. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of talk about the psychology of immigrant psychology. And I guess I've kind of just sort of been like, yeah, it sounds, the kind of person who chooses to stay versus the kind of person who chooses to leave. It's like, oh yeah, the person who leaves that's the person who has agency and they're seeking to change things. And I was like, yeah, that could be it. But also now I think about it, it's like, well, that might be the person who's not able to compete as well. The more desperate one. I think both things are true, though. There are sometimes it is the lower class desperate person who emigrates, but also I don't know. I feel like especially in more of this like later stage of emigration and immigrants to America, like now I think it is definitely the capable and ambitious young people in Europe and who come over here to like pursue the chance of hitting it big. But it's probably not, yeah, it's definitely not the comfortable upper class. Maybe. I don't know, not that if they're not, yeah, they're not that like it's very seldom that I've ever met like the upper or middle upper class of Central America, I've played soccer and known tons of Mexican Americans and others like Central Americans, um, you know, and some South Americans. So I've, played with all these guys, and they pretty much always have been from the lower class. And yet I know that there is a large, well, I don't know about, there is an upper class. I guess I did. I guess in college I played soccer with probably one member of the Brazilian upper class. Um, but then on the East Coast I met a bunch of Brazilians who were not from. Well, yeah. I don't know where I'm going with this, except Who knows exactly the nature of the immigrants? George is claiming that it doesn't really. He's saying the thing that caused the new America to succeed was land, not some claim about the people who came here having magical abilities or are self-selecting into like the kind of um, you know self-selecting. Oh, these people were like our forefathers were not super special. We want to praise them and glorify them, but maybe it was just the land being available to an agricultural society that enabled a kind of independent spirit, energy and hopefulness and freedom that was the result of the land, not the cause. It has given a consciousness of freedom even to the dweller in crowded cities, and has been a wellspring of hope even to those who have never thought of taking refuge upon it. The child of the people, as he grows to manhood in Europe, finds all the best seats at the banquet of life marked taken, and must struggle with his fellows for the crumbs that fall, without one chance in 1,000 of forcing or sneaking his way to a seat. In America, whatever his condition, there has always been the consciousness that the public domain lay behind him, and the knowledge of this fact, acting and reacting, has penetrated our whole national life, giving to it generosity and independence, elasticity and ambition. All that we are proud of in the American character, all that makes our conditions and institutions better than those of older countries, we may trace to the fact that land has been cheap in the United States, because new soil has been open to the emigrant. But our advance has reached the Pacific. Further west we cannot go, and increasing population can but expand north and south and fill up what has been passed over. North it is already filling up the valley of the Red River, pressing into that of the Saskatchewan, and preempting Washington Territory. South it is covering westward Texas and taking up the arable valleys of New Mexico and Arizona. All right, return once more to the idea of the infinite plane. On the infinite plane, you could be constantly moving farther out and starting over from scratch. And each couple generations, you could move out farther and start building up. And yeah, each one could build up a little, pretty fast because they know how it's done. But yet each generation moving out and homesteading and moving out farther and farther would be starting over from scratch. They would not be able to trade at all effectively. Like, can you imagine there being a copy of America in the Pacific, the continent, or, the contiguous, whatever, another continent just in the Pacific? Yeah, we could go and restart a new world, and you could totally build it up, and that'd be fine. But you go out there now and you try to like manually start farming some like tobacco fields, and then you try to get in your sailboat and come back here, and then you try to sell that to us, and we'll offer you like nothing for it because we can produce way more tobacco. And we also don't care about tobacco as much, maybe. So you would not even have the trade partners that the New World had when it was developing. So it would be even harder. But it would still be possible. So an infinite plane would not be as desperate as modern globalized society has gotten, where we've run out of that infinite plane of good, fertile land. So you would never, the bottom wouldn't ever get super low, I guess, on an infinite plane. But future generations would not really be able to participate uh, with the advances of society. And uh, yeah, whereas it's even worse in our current world where there isn't even that infinite plane um, to start over in. The Republic has entered upon a new era, an era in which the monopoly of the land will tell with an accelerating effect. The great fact which has been so potent is ceasing to be. The public domain is almost gone. A very few years will end its influence, already rapidly failing. I do not mean to say that there will be no public domain. For a long time to come, there will be millions of acres of public lands carried on the books of the Land Department. But it must be remembered that the best part of the continent for agricultural purposes is already overrun, and that it is the poorest land that is left. It must be remembered that what remains comprises the great mountain ranges, the sterile deserts, the high plains fit only for grazing. And it must be remembered that much of this land which figures in the reports as open to settlement is unsurveyed land which has been appropriated by possessory claims or locations which do not appear until the land is returned as surveyed. What? I don't know what this is about. Much of this land which figures in the reports as open to settlement. Okay, so there's a bunch of claims about land that's open to settlement, hasn't been surveyed, which has been appropriated by possessory claims or locations which do not appear until the land is returned as surveyed. I see. So I guess people say that there's a whole bunch of land open for settlement, but he's saying that it actually, once it's surveyed, it is appropriated by possessory claim. But I don't get it. Isn't that if there's a whole bunch of land open to settlement, whoever goes and surveys it can claim it? Or are you saying it really isn't, it's already pre-claimed? I don't know. It's a historical thing, and I don't think he's going to go super in detail, so we'll move on. California figures on the books of the Land Department as the greatest land state of the Union, containing nearly 100 million acres of public land, something like 1/12 of the whole public domain. Yet so much of this is covered by railroad grants or held in the way of which I have spoken. Okay, he did sort of explain it. So a bunch of people at his time are saying, yeah, there's still tons of open land, 100 million acres. But now he's saying there's just a misconception. A lot of this open land is already granted to railroads, or it's subject to these possessory claims, which appear once it's surveyed. So maybe you have to survey a bunch of land to determine what category it falls into, and if it falls into the specific category, then it is just claimed as part of the grant or whatever these other claims are. And we don't know. Of this 100 million that's available, maybe 50 million falls under the purview of the railroads, maybe 10 million, maybe 1 million, maybe 99 million, I guess. And I don't know. So much of this land consists of untillable mountains or plains which require irrigation. So much is monopolized by locations which command the water, that as a matter of fact it is difficult to point the immigrant to any part of the state where he can take up a farm on which he can settle and maintain a family. And so men weary of the quest, I was right the first time, end up buying land or renting it on shares. It is not that there is any real scarcity of land in California. For an empire in herself, California will someday maintain a population as large as that of France. But appropriation has got ahead of the settler and manages to keep just ahead of him. France population, 68 million. California population, 40 million. Not quite right there, George. Not yet, at least. That's funny. LA greater area population. 13, 12, yeah. Huh. I guess I'm gonna end it there. I had a lot to say today, for better or for worse.